It's my belief that the goal of your spiritual journey is not to become a better person, but to become a whole person. It's great to be with you. This is my first time at Makers. This is my virgin birth. So it's happening right now. Who knew babies were born looking like this? But I'm glad to be here. It's been wonderful. I'm an artist, and I make images, and I want to do a little practice with you. So can we go to the next slide? I don't know how much you guys do this during church, but we're going to do this. So when you look at this series of images up here, I want you to find which one is you right now? Just take a moment. Perfect! Who said fire? Oh, okay, great. I was going to say, if you feel comfortable in sharing, always. Does anybody else? You don't have to, you can be more than one. Do you have a couple? The whole screen. I did not expect that answer. The roof rack with all the luggage boxes, whatever's on top. You too? The tipping over? The tipping over one's interesting because I actually had the intention that was like a car pulling a trick, you know? But yeah, it can be both. And sometimes you fall over when you try to do something risky. Yeah. With the stuff coming out of the back? Oh, yeah, with all the like wood, carrying things. Yeah. Fireworks, celebration. What? And feel free to, take as long as you need to, do this. But what is happening in this moment to you, to us, this conversation that we're having? I think one of the interesting functions about art is that art, one of its functions is that this is my song, and you turn it up and you sing along. What are you saying in that moment? What you're saying is that somehow, sonically and lyrically, the artist perfectly described what it feels like to be in your own skin. They gave you a vehicle to become honest with where you're at, what it's like to be you right now. I actually think that this is what prayer is. We don't recite these words or look at images or songs as prayers, as much as those words, images, songs become the excavation tools to the conversation that's already going on inside of you. That hidden interior conversation that you're having with reality and the giver of that reality. Yeah, like you have that thing, and then it happens. Somebody says something, you're like, ooh, that's exactly it. I'm this one. How do you know that? It's because it's excavating that thing out of you. I also think what's happening when we look at art or when we let it excavate us is that it's revealing our vulnerabilities. You can go to the next slide. Our vulnerabilities. A vulnerability is not necessarily what our weaknesses and limitations are. Vulnerability is more about your relationship with those weaknesses and limits. It means making yourself available to being connected to. It's allowing people to potentially, yes, and courage, all of those things, right? But a spiritual life, well, you have lots of options on how you want to do that. Perfectionism. Or you can see that you're spiritual. A long and exhausting presidential election. We are seeing these awful images from Syria, destruction, death, displacement. There was the Zika virus. Remember that virus? I love Christmas, like Mark said. It's like my favorite holiday to do with the world I found myself in. Is it something that happened long ago? Something that just happened back then? Yeah, it did happen back then, but it's also something happening right now. How do we experience the happening right now? I'm not a woman, but I'm married to one. And I have witnessed 3 pregnancies and 3 births up close. And what I learned, and at the time of all of this, we were having our 3rd child, and what I was like looking at all this one, this brand, and I'm not even just talking about like this, the obsession with the Santa story, which is fine, but a little overdone, right? Even like the Christian brand of Christmas, I was like, it looks very sanitized and safe. It doesn't even look like it's a story that happened to real people. And then I was seeing my wife going through pregnancy and birth and all of that. And yeah, it's glorious and transformational, and there's really magical moments, but it's also like painful and risky. And there's a lot of fluids involved. And I was like, wow, incarnation, if we mean like something coming from a hidden place into a seen place, is very vulnerable. And maybe the place that we can find where Christ is still incarnating in our world today is through the exact same way that he came into the world back then, which was through human vulnerability. Maybe our vulnerabilities, the places where we take off our armor and connect with one another, are the places where Christ is still coming in our midst. And so I started as a visual artist. I knew that I needed to like come up with my own visual vocabulary, which is a lot of what you see here. And I did that year after year after year till eventually became a book and all of that. So this morning, I just want to kind of do like an art class. We're just going to look at like a few images. And I just want us to kind of have like a meditation on let these images and these stories kind of excavate us, that we can see that it's not just happening back then, but it's also happening right now. Let's go to the first image. John, who wrote some books that are in the Bible, they're all bestseller. He makes amazing royalty checks. He and his friends said, "We saw the glory of Yahweh. We saw the glory of the holy, invisible mystery in Jesus, and it was full of grace and truth." Now, truth is simply defined as the actual state of the matter, what's really happening, which I think is fascinating because truth has something to do with perception, right? Clear perspective. And like, I think I'm on a journey of trying to have a clearer perspective, but it's actually incredibly hard. I think it's hard because when we're trying to have a clear perspective, there's two things we need to consider. One is, what kind of vantage point are we looking at something at? Like the truth of the matter could be that there are 5 apples on a table, right? There's 5 apples, that's the truth. But if you're a 3-year-old and you can only see like the tops of 3 apples, you're like, no, there's 3 apples, right? And I don't know why all these adults don't know how to count, right? Like, where your vantage point is matters on what you think is true. Also, personal preference kind of comes in on perspective. The truth of the matter is that Maroon 5 is an annoying band, but sold out concerts worldwide probably say otherwise, right? Like, what we need to do to have a clear perspective is understand the vantage point that we may have and also our personal preferences that we're bringing to the situation. I think it's really interesting that when they talked about being in the presence of Jesus, that they expressed that he saw clearly, that he had a perspective that saw the real, right? Truth is seeing the real. And grace, well, grace is defined as the freely unmerited favor of God, which sounds amazing. That is the good news this morning, right? But if I'm honest with you, I'm not sure how to experience the unmerited favor and love of God today. Like, should I expect that, that the way that I would experience that is that things go my way so I can hashtag blessed all my posts about, like, my great life? Should I expect that there should be some cosmic and kind of weirdly ghostly hug that's going to happen, or, like, heavenly high five? Like, oh, whoa, that happened. What is, angels unaware. Okay, Amy Grant was right. Like, how do we experience the unmerited favor and love of God on a day-to-day basis? I started to understand and really deeply believe that grace is the antidote to shame. Shame, you know it. It's there hiding under the surface of everything. Shame is the belief, the argument that who you are right now, the real, is actually not enough to be loved. Shame is the janky treadmill we can all find ourselves on, running, going nowhere, trying to earn being loved. And what's interesting is that, like, when Jesus came into the world, there was no prerequisite or having to earn presence. There was no like, hey, before you get to experience the presence of God incarnate in front of you, you have to be this way. It just was freely given. Love was freely given. Grace is presence freely given. Grace is presence not withheld. It has nothing to do about worthiness or not. Grace is just receiving what's already been given. My friend Stephen told me that he stopped being a Christian because it stopped making sense to him. At least the story that he was given was this, that when he was born, there was something wrong with him, and that he needed to say some sentences and believe some conclusions, and then he would finally be loved. And I don't know, maybe you've felt that. Maybe you've come to that conclusion or have danced around that conclusion. I think sometimes, like what Stephen was saying, he was like, if the giver of me doesn't love me already, how could I possibly convince that giver to love me? Like, the odds are already stacked against me. I actually think that why people stop believing or losing their faith is because if they get to the spot where they're like, if the fundamental belief of that who I am is that the giver of me doesn't love me, well, that's awful news. That's not good news. And now all of us on our journey, at some point, in order to receive the gift of ourselves, we have to go, you know what? I don't know how to earn love. I just hope that love would love me for me. We all want to be loved for who we really are. The vulnerable, limitations, the good, the bad, all of it, the whole thing. We want to be loved for the real. It's interesting, at the beginning of the New Testament, Matthew gives this long genealogy of Jesus. And if you were trying to start a religion that was foolproof, you wouldn't list the names that are listed there. Because when you start getting into the genealogy, there's some like really scandalous people in this genealogy. There's some great, mundane, kind of live boring and normal lives. But then there's some like murderers and like people who were awful leaders. There's some really, really sexy parts in there. And yet this is the genealogy in which love incarnates into the world. I wonder where the place that we can start to experience how Christ is incarnating today is in our own genealogy. I mean, aren't we, a bit of like a biblical genealogy? You have your patriarchs and matriarchs of faith within you, the good, the impressive, but don't you have your hateful and murderous intent? Don't you have your interior abuse of power? And that presence is not withheld, full of grace and truth. Let's go to the next slide. Next image. Don't be surprised if your current unease is that exact avenue of presence. Morning sickness. Is there anybody who's pregnant? Your body, the female body, is changing and expanding. It's making a place to have this baby the next day, but not going to the party, right? It's this thing that happens. It's easy for us to throw up last night's dinner, right? It's interesting that there's this moment from the rub of divine revelation is that there's this moment where it's going to become uneasy because it's the announcement that you're going to grow. The rub of divine revelation is that it's announcing that you're about to grow. Grow is never easy, right? Because growth doesn't come through any kind of ease. Growth is like the stretching and expanding of your capacity to be able to go through something. And often the change that needs to happen to us in our lives, like the growth that we need to go through, will leave us heaving on the sidelines, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever tried to train for something. Maybe I've had this experience where I ran so hard that I wanted to throw up, right? Sure, physical training. But also there's the nausea, the nauseous anxiety of packing up all your earthly goods and putting them in a car and then moving to a city that you've never been to before. There's the gagging nerves of trying to date again. There's the vomitous risk of starting a new business. Look, I've tried to spend years growing as a public speaker, and there have been quite a few moments before speaking that I've thrown up a little bit in my mouth, of the nerves of getting up and presenting myself to an audience. Like it's not a sign, but all of this like nausea and this and this gagging, it's not a sign that you're doing it wrong. In fact, just like pregnancy, it's a sign that you're on the right track. I think the difficulty in letting God grow you is that you have to trust hold on. The difficulty in letting God grow you is that you've been asked to trust that you're not going to be in charge of what the outcome is going to look like. Like, we have a bit of control in the ways we'd like to grow. If you do some sit-ups or hold off on carbs, you can be in control of what's going to happen. But come on, I love bread. God, bread's so good. Hold off on carbs? Oh, Lord Jesus, bread's so good. One of my favorite artists is Sister Coretta Kent. She's this nun artist, but she said, God's not dead, he's bread. And I think that's great. It's a great line. So we can be in control of the ways that we want to grow. But when you say to the Almighty, you say, I want to have a meaningful life. I'd like my life to matter. Please, here I am. Do with me as you will. You don't know what kind of secret cosmic strategies are going to be put into play that are going to be hidden and are going to happen to you. Look at all the people involved in this biblical story. Look at all the people from the Bible. I love that people I love the Bible. People are like, I love the Bible. But does anybody really want to be in the Bible? Have you ever thought about that? You love the Bible, but do you want to be in the Bible? Because, we can look at these stories and we can see people who've gone through incredibly hard things, but we see the end of the story and we see that it was worth showing up for. But you might find yourself in a situation where you're in the middle of the story. And being in the middle of the story is really uneasy and hidden and scary. And maybe there's been a moment where you've gone, how did I end up here? Quoting David Byrne of the Talking Heads, well, how did I get here? And maybe you said, God, is this really where you led me to be? I'm just checking in because I know there's lots going on in the world right now, but do you still see me? It feels really uneasy right now. If you were to ask a mom hugging the toilet seat, why? Why are you doing all of this? And as she wipes the toilet paper and the remnants of last night's dinners off her face, she'll go, for love. It's worth it because I love this baby. I'm doing this for love. And I wonder if the answer God gives us is very similar to that mother. It's for love that you've been taken from what is known to the uncomfortability of what is unknown. It's for love that you've been removed from your comfortable perch so that you could have a different kind of perspective in the world. It's for love that you've been broken open so that you could have a larger capacity for faith and love and hope. It's for love. It's because you're loved. We can go to the next picture. Next slide. It's time now for story time with Scott the Painter. I know in churches usually they'll have the kids come up and they'll read a story. We won't do that, but we'll just pretend that we're going to read a story. Hi, kids. It's nice to be with you this morning. There's this really great book called Honest Advent. You should check it out. But I want to read a story from you, and we can go to the next slide. And there's a picture in this book. It's this picture. All right? And I'd like to read this story to you. It's assumed that Mary rode on a donkey, but the Bible doesn't say she did. It's assumed there was an innkeeper, but it doesn't mention one anywhere. It's assumed there were 3 magi, but it doesn't give a number of those who showed up. It's assumed that Jesus was born in a stable, but all it says is he was laid in a manger, and that could have been any number of places. Christmas comes with many assumptions, some helpful and some not so much. Spirituality also comes with many assumptions, and the ones that fail us are the ones we make about what it's supposed to look like, who is worthy for it to happen to, and what kind of outcome it's supposed to have for us. Assumptions like, You should be more than you are right now to be pleasing to God. Your weaknesses are in the way of God's plan for your life. Your lack of religious fervor is a disqualifier for divine participation. You're probably not doing it right. Other spiritual people have something you don't have. Our assumptions hinder our spiritual journey in all kinds of ways, and the antidote to assumption is surprise. The surprise of Christ's incarnation is that it happened in Mary's day, as it is happening every day in your lack of resources, your overcrowded lodging, your unlit night sky, your humble surroundings. It's a surprise that life can come through barren places. It's a surprise that meek nobodies partake in divine plans. It's a surprise that messengers are sent all along the hidden journey of life to let you know that you're not alone. It's a surprise that you will be given everything you need to accomplish what you've been asked to do. It's a surprise that nothing can separate you from the love of God. Nothing can separate you from love. Your assumptions believe there must be something that can, but surprise, nothing can. May you thank God with joyful surprise at how much you have assumed incorrectly. Let's go to our last image. I don't know how sovereignty works. I don't know what's God's will, what's not God's will, or where that all falls into play. I just know that God is really detailed. And whenever I awaken to that intentionality, I'm filled with wonder. I experienced this intentionality at one of the lowest moments of my life. I used to, a long time ago, it's been over a decade, I worked at a church, and it was a great experience. But I burned out for a lot of reasons, and led to this long season of depression and therapy, and I took a different job, and then I was moving on to another job, and then I worked for this design agency in Portland, and then I got laid off from that job, and not any. It sounds like I got laid off. Wasn't me, it was them. No, the company folded after a year. It was like their finances. But I found myself like being unemployed and just like, how did I get here? And the pastor from this church I used to work at contacted me and was like, hey, do you want to come back? And I was like, that is the most insane thing I've ever heard in my life. First of all, it's like 2,000 miles away from where I lived. I grew up in Seattle. It was like moving to Houston, Texas, and then moving back to Seattle. I was like, that's insane. But a friend of mine was like, you're not 100% why you should say no, but you're not 100% sure why you should not say yes either. So I started discerning it, and I was entering into a conversation with this church I used to work at. And there was a lot of like hurt and misunderstandings, and it was a lot of conversations, a lot of things that we had to deal with and work out. And I actually flew down to the church. I spent time with them, had meetings with elders and the pastor and all of these things, and was like, oh my gosh, I think this is going to happen. This is an insane story. And then I hadn't heard anything for like a week, and so I contacted the person who was in charge of this kind of hiring and stuff, and I was like, hey, just checking in, what's happening? And he's like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, we're actually going to pass. And not only did that hurt, I actually did not know what to do with myself. I was like a 38-year-old man with like kids. I was the breadwinner and I had no plans. I had absolutely no idea what to do next at all. I remember just like weeping that night. I just was like, I feel so lost. Is this how this all turns out? I don't know what to do. A few days later, I did get hired, just like a little side job, to do this project for this YouTuber. And I was at Home Depot. I was going to build this thing. I was standing in the screws, the nuts and bolts line or aisle, and looking for some wood screws. And I ran into this guy, Cameron. Cameron, I had met. He was I met him on some creative projects in the Portland area. Cameron, long hair and a beard. He's a carpenter, and he leads a home church. Like, sneakily messianic, right? And he goes, I was like, oh, Cameron, and we talked for a bit, and he's like, how was your week? And I was like, man, if I'm honest, I've had a really awful week. And I told him what had been going on, and he looked at me and he goes, I think God wants to say something to you. And look, I'm all for the magic of life, but when people are like, I have a message from God from you, I'm like, maybe it's a lot of your own projection. Let's discern some spirits together. But I was like, okay. And he goes, God wants you to know that he sees that you're in a really painful spot. And he also wants you to know that the work that you've been doing to reconcile with that community has been obedience, even if you're not going to go there. It was really intimate. And I broke down in the nuts and bolts aisle of Home Depot. I just started crying, just because I felt seen. John the Baptist, there's a moment when he sees his cousin and he goes, look, the Lamb of God who's come to take away the sins of the world, which is a weird statement to say about your relative, right? I don't think he was saying Jesus is kind of sheepish at family gatherings, right? What he was saying, he's like, I see there's been this long metaphor of a sheep, a lamb, throughout my tradition, and I see that it's actually my cousin. He was moving from lamb to man. He was moving from ideas and ideology to practicality. He was moving from abstract to personal. In the book of Revelation at the beginning, it says there's Jesus says, I'm the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, who was and is to come. And that's a real, so we have this lamb who was, who is, and is to come, and there's kind of my meditations on that. But I think what's interesting when I think of what stands out to me is the who was. Because who was means that whoever, who has been participating or at least knows what's been going on until right now. Sometimes I don't know if we forget that maybe God sees us or knows what's going on. Because often, I don't think our question about our life or really even about Christmas is our question about Christmas is, how does this seasonal holiday mean? What does it mean for the world today? I think our real question is, who cares? Who is it that cares? Who cares about me? Who cares about you? Who cares about us? Has who been watching where we find ourselves today? Conversations about sovereignty always kind of get to the abstract. They always become about how did they gather their tents around? Or how did they, what kind of symbols were there? What's the afterlife? How is it all going to end? All of these abstract ideas, because it's easy to discuss and wrestle with abstract ideas. It's a little more difficult to decipher where the who is right now in our everyday lives, in the heartbeats and heartbreaks, in the bank accounts and the food stamps, in the settled or the moving, is who cares about me, about you, about us? It's actually the everyday life is where we find out who cares. I stopped crying on Cameron. And I just said, that was great, thank you. And I needed to go, and I was like, oh, so what are you here for? And he goes, nothing. Because I was driving by with my wife, and I just felt the Spirit say, go into Home Depot and wait. I've just been standing here for like 15 minutes. My wife's in the car on her phone. I've just been waiting. He walked out. I bought my screws, checked out. I said hi to his wife in the car, wished him goodbye. And on my drive home, I thanked God for seeing me, that I needed to know that somebody cared about me in that moment, that there's actually someone who cares. But it's interesting to me that the who that cares didn't go, here's how it's all going to work out. Here's the next steps. Let me give you a holy spreadsheet about what you're supposed to do. Because if God sent out heavenly spreadsheets, we'd be like, thank you, and we'd just go do it on our own. So I was like, what? If you're not telling me what to do, then I guess, what does this moment mean? And this question came up, which is a question I want to give to you about how to ask or how to experience the incarnate Christ coming in your midst today. And the question that came to me in that moment is, well, what is the only conversation I can have by being here in this moment, in this broken, open, no plans? What's the only conversation I can have by being here? And as I sat with that, this deep, that it's the thing, the song, the excavated, it came out. It was like the deep conversation I was having with reality, and the giver of my reality was, am I still called to be an artist? Not as a person, but as a job, as a vocation. When I stopped kind of being a full-time artist to do all these creative works with other organizations, I was just single, or I was married and my wife was my sugar mama. Now I'm supporting a family. I don't know how to make that much money being an artist. I was like, I don't know. But it was am I still called to be an artist? And the answer was yes. And saying yes to that inevitably led me to commit to pursuing work, developing a voice, creating a craft, jotting those things down. It made me the person who wrote the words that I'm saying in this book that I'm saying to you right now. What was the conversation I could only have by being here? Because who cares? Who cares? Pray with me. May you, God, holy mystery, the giver of our lives, the ultimate who. When we ask who cares, we know we're asking you. We're so thankful that there was something that happened back then, but we really desire and long to see it happening right now. May you help us to be ones who are awakened to the presence of God in our lives right now. May we be ones that when we find ourselves in an uneasy situation, that we can trust that love is growing us, that we can be ones who get off the janky treadmill of trying to earn love and be the ones who receive the love that has already been given. Could we be ones who understand that we have assumed incorrectly and are surprised at how much is being given to us already? And maybe we be ones who are open to crying in a Home Depot aisle to understand that who cares about our lives and ask, what is the only conversation I can have by being here? Because you care. You really do. Amen.